Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. It's Friday, so I just want to keep it light with a discussion style video, although maybe not the lightest of topics. Today, I want to talk about why these decks that I'm going to mention just pretty much need to get out of here, need to be dealt with in some way, need to be obliterated from competitive play, pretty much. Now, it's a bit too early to be talking about specific ban list stuff like predictions and wish lists, because we're not even the same month as set 21 is going to be released, but we're still getting all these reveals, you know, rather early. So I figured it's time to talk about this stuff, and you know, obviously, like I said, when the month comes of the actual set release, I'll talk more about like ban list, wish list, predictions, and obviously cover the eventual ban list. But yeah, we'll talk about that in today's video. If you guys are new, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys do want to help me out, definitely go down to the link tree in the description and just check out my comic book coming out, New Mafia Genesis. I wrote it, I'm funding it, and I'm publishing it all myself. It's a passion project and love letter of mine to all the comics, just like Dragon Ball, that I grew up watching and enjoying. So yeah, you guys can check out the art samples there, check out a bit about the story, and you know, donate if you guys want to help me out. I really would appreciate it. But anyways, let's jump right in. Of course, in this discussion, you know, we're starting off with the red behemoths, Sin and Gogeta. Now, I'm going to start this off by granting a couple charities to these decks and to Bandai, right? This is in no ways meant to be like, oh, Bandai messed up, this is unbelievable, blah blah blah. There's nothing like that in this video. But you know, these decks have been around for a bit too long now. They've been around since obviously set 18. We're coming up on set 21, and we've had some, you know, in between formats with like promos and stuff coming out, you know, minor shifts to formats. So these decks are coming up on being relevant for like 5-ish formats, which is definitely a little bit long. And the really unfortunate thing about these decks is that they've kind of gate kept other red decks from really being able to shine, which I would really hate to see going into set 21 with the new Power Pole deck and with the new Garlic Jr. Wish deck. I think those decks are really cool. I think other decks that have come out in the Zenkai block are really cool, but they've just been severely overshadowed by Sin and Gogeta. Now, I had the Z leader here, not to talk about the widely proposed errata of putting an energy cost on it. Like, that might be a great thing to balance this deck. Honestly, my perfect solution, let's just ban all these leaders and start from scratch. I know all the archetype cards will become unplayable, but we can worry about that at another time with like a reboot leader or something, right? But the one thing I want to say that grants a charity to this deck is that while this leader is insanely strong, while it does implement free play, which has been historically problematic in Dragon Ball Super, it's not Storm levels of degenerate, if you're following me. Like, I come from an era where you could die on your 1 energy to your opponent's 2 energy Storm turn, and that was like the biggest point of frustration. Back then I was very vocal about how problematic that was. Of course, other people were too, and you know, I am less vocal about these decks, which might be viewed as problematic, because I've grown as a content creator, and honestly, I don't like envy Bandai's position at all to have to try to please their entire player base. It's an impossible task, and you're always going to have some people that love stuff, some people that hate certain things, and yeah, again, very unenviable position. But generally, I do very much like the direction they've taken the game since the Storm days, because you're not dying on turn 2 to Sin Shenron, which I do very much appreciate. Like, those days of like dying on turn 2 are pretty much over. You have to be playing some like crazy rogue deck that goes down to like 4 life on turn 1 to really die to Sin on like turn 2 typically. That's just not super realistic. In a competitive game of Dragon Ball Super, you're probably going like turn 4, turn 5 against Sin or Gogeta, which at least gives you the feeling of like, okay, I played a full game. Like, I got to do what my deck wanted to do generally. Maybe it didn't stack up in power compared to Sin or Gogeta, and that's like a kind of a different discussion, but at least you're not dying to these aggro decks like nearly as fast, which I do very much appreciate. So I do like that design trend of like coming away from these crazy turn 2 kills. But now, like, the problem with these decks is their cards are definitely far overtuned compared to the current card pool. Again, I think we have plenty of tools to deal with aggro in its current form, but these cards are way overtuned compared to the other red strategies, which I think is more so the problem. And really, my issue with Sin and Gogeta is more so just like the amount of time they've been around, more so than how overtuned they are. Because again, as more new red decks come out, they either have to be better than Sin and Gogeta, which God forbid that, right? Like, absolutely God forbid. Or these decks need to be dealt with so those decks can step up and we can have, you know, some weaker aggro stuff that, you know, people can actually play. So Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Like, this is something that's been talked to death about, and that is just that Sin and Gogeta make Z energy like way too efficiently. It's way too free for them, and Sin's version of doing that is the cracked Dragon Balls. No other red deck's able to do these things. Like Pan, which has a big need for Z energy through its Awakening Condition and its main play being SS4 Goku Defender of Life, doesn't make Z energy nearly as efficiently as Sin or Gogeta, and that was a very strange design choice to start the Zenkai block with these decks that make Z energy so efficiently, and then make more decks in following sets that really struggle to make Z energy. Like Android 13 has a lot of really good Z deck plays, its Z Leader being a really phenomenal card, but that deck struggles to like maintain hand size and make Z energy, whereas Sin and Gogeta either, you know, maintain hand parity, or in some cases just straight up plus for making Z energy. Like that's not right. Now, one card I want to point your attention to, this might be a hot take, but I personally have more of a problem with Sin Shenron Dread Destroyer than I actually do with the 8-drop Omega Shenron Unfeeling Retribution. That might not make sense, but like a lot of times with cards like Dread Destroyer, they have restrictions like if your opponent has 2 or more energy or something along those lines. This card doesn't care about that. All it cares about is how much Z energy you have, or if you are a Z leader, and then it replaces itself and gets played. Now, this is somewhat similar to the Storm levels of Frustration, where this is a huge body you're playing on turn 2, possibly your opponent's 1 energy if you went first, and Sin plays 8 life super combos and Trunks Deluge. So this is 9 times out of 10 going to hit you for 30k double strike on your 1 energy, and you cannot do anything about that. Obviously, that's not as big of a problem anymore now that Haze Shenron is actually banned. At least it's not a 30k double strike crit you can't do anything about. You still get those 2 cards to your hand. But still, again, like if you're playing a deck that maybe takes a bit of its life early and then goes down to like 5, and this puts you to 3, that's a pretty big feels bad, not gonna lie. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, Omega Shenron, it's still an insanely strong card, but like at least you have 1 extra turn to try to prep for it. Maybe you have blocker negates at that point, or maybe like Robotic Riposte or Defending Friends are online, depending on what color you're playing. That's why I have just like a bit more of an issue with Dread Destroyer than I actually do with Omega Shenron. I feel like Omega Shenron ends up getting negated more often than this card actually gets negated, if that makes sense. But yeah, deck's just definitely way too stale. Let's of course talk about its red brother in crime. We have SS4 Goku and Vegeta, SS4 Gogeta. What is up with this deck? Well, I mean, I'm kind of just retreading ground here, but this leader is just way too efficient. It draws way too many cards. Sin is like the ultra red aggro deck of the current format. This deck is definitely aggressive, but the tempo this deck generates is definitely what's more unfair about it. Like, it's the whole thing of swinging, drawing, playing a card that draws a card, and then comboing that card to draw another card. Like, literally, your Awakened Leader swing draws 3, which is literally insane when you think about any other leader in the game that just draws 1 on swing. So that part's insane. A good errata to this would probably be to remove the draw from the leader swing and just force them to play their battle cards that draw cards, and then combo them to draw another card. That would still be really good, and you'd still be seeing 2 cards on a leader draw, which would be a bit more in line than with other decks, but you're still making Z energy on top of that, so it'd still be pretty good. But yeah, that is one reason why that no other red deck can stack up to this. But of course, the other elephant in the room is Gogeta Triumphant Together. I think that your perspective on this card really depends on what color you play. Like, if you play blue, okay, cool, you have Dirty Burst. This card kind of sucks. If you have yellow now in set 20, Vegito Overwhelming Might is a really good answer to this card. They just can't wipe your board for free. Yeah, they still have the triple strike going at your face, but I mean, hey, you have your super combos, you'll be okay. Obviously, if you're playing like red yourself, and specifically not Gogeta or Sin, or you're playing black or green, you definitely have a much bigger problem with this card. This card can definitely gatekeep those colors because they don't have nearly as efficient answers to this card as yellow or blue. It's really sad in the case of green, which, I mean, of course, green has a ton of its own problems, but green has Big Amore, which is just so bad compared to its other counterparts and other colors that do similar things. Like in yellow, for example, you've got Unison of Fury, which at least gives you a body. Maybe not one that you'll attack with super often, but it at least turns other things online, like certain extra cards, certain counterplays, whatever. And then compared to Dirty Burst, it's just not even in the same realm. Like, Dirty Burst has the flexibility of being a negate. It can be used in response to this thing's play, as opposed to Big Amore needing to be used preemptively. And at least Dirty Burst draws you a card. Big Amore is just worse in every single way. Yeah, and the problem with green is it's always had a bad red matchup because dormant potential is just typically not good against red, because as insane as it sounds, red decks go wide and tall. So if I swing my 35k triple strike Omega Shenron at your green leader and you activate dormant, I'm gonna laugh because you just pitch 2 cards and now you still have to deal with this 35k triple strike coming at your face, right? So yeah, that's just an inherent green problem. But the point is, most colors can't actually deal with this card effectively, and now with the new Shenron SCR coming out, this card seems like it'll be even more problematic. Maybe they'll get errata to like only be playable by its own skill. That might be a good way to go about it. But yeah, again, not really like a ban list prediction video here. Now I want to talk about Rush Tag SSB Vegeta, because it's kind of mind-blowing that if you have played any red deck that isn't Sin or Gogeta, you would know that Rush Tag is actually kind of like a very mid, like even suboptimal Z deck battle card, because those decks don't generate nearly enough Z energy to make this card that good. Like, you need 5 Z energy to a lot of times get the most value out of Rush Tag SSB Vegeta, to play it and then get one of your Z energy back, and then you know, use the activate main, so on and so forth. Sin and Gogeta do that as part of their engine, and they end up doing it for free or plussing in the case of Gogeta. But Pan and Android 13, they don't use this card nearly as much because they don't make that much Z energy. So it makes Rush Attack feel extra broken. A lot of people have talked about, you know, limiting Rush Attack or banning the card or whatever, but the card's actually pretty mediocre outside of these red decks, right? So that to me is like just a sign that these decks are definitely staying past their welcome. I would love to see the red decks like Pan, Android 13, and the Power Pole deck and the Garlic Jr. Wish deck out of the new set. I would love to see those decks have the room to step up, but that will never happen while these decks are still around and in their current states. Then we have to talk about Gamma, because this deck's been around even longer than Sin and Gogeta. I think generally it's always been kind of a problem when leaders give you free energy going into the opponent's next turn. Like we saw SS3 Goku get banned all the way back in the day for that reason. They did a good job of handicapping SS3 Goku Reboot, because that deck never really took off too much, although there were maybe 1 or 2 formats where that deck was a little bit oppressive. But yeah, with all these new Android cards coming out, Gamma just finds itself getting more and more support. And I think at first it was frustrating because it untapped 3 essentially at the end of a turn, and then you had Android 14 Inorganic Horror to floodgate the opponent. And yes, that card is plenty answerable, but now we have a card like Defending Friends, which just adds more support to the deck. And then on top of that, you're playing like Cell Ultimate Bio Androids to just wipe the board and then get 3 free energy back on top of that. It can feel very oppressive. Now, my opinion on the upper echelons like competitive Dragon Ball Super, I don't find Gamma to be that frustrating. I do just, you know, equip my decks with the proper counterplays to deal with the floodgates. But I think this deck kind of does introduce storm levels of frustration for new players. Not in the sense that you're dying super quick. Gamma's not killing anyone on turn 2. But I think the frustrating part about Gamma is that for a new player, let's say you go to locals for the first time and play your starter deck. Obviously, you're probably not going to win just playing a starter deck anyway, but you play against Gamma, and your turn just gets stopped every single turn by all these floodgates, Defending Friends, Inorganic Horror, the 4-drop for the new 21 archetype, like all that stuff just stopping your turn, and you not having the knowledge to stop those cards. You might never go to Dragon Ball locals again. That's like super frustrating. And then of course in competitive Dragon Ball there are some frustration points with that same thing, like they might have more floodgates than you actually have answers, which is definitely a frustrating thing. So yeah, I think that this leader just definitely has overstayed its welcome. Just with all the new Android support, whether it's meant to support this or not, it still does, and it just makes the deck definitely stronger and stronger, as to where I think it's probably just time for it to go so we can get some fresh new blue decks in here. And I know 21 is obviously a really good blue deck right now. I don't think people are talking about it nearly as much because it's not as new, but also 21 really does struggle against aggro decks. Like that deck was designed fairly well, as crazy as that might sound. Like using your opponent's cards as energy is kind of not okay, but that deck loses so hard to aggro that you know, I think it's generally more or less fine. If the format slows down too much, then yeah, 21 might become a problem, but we still want to have good aggro decks. We just don't want them to be Sin or Gogeta anymore, to be honest. Then we have Trunkshita, which some people have talked about in terms of like getting it out of here because it's been around so long. It's been around just as long as Gamma, and I think people point more attention to this too because it won Worlds, but don't forget that was a very specialized format where it was really just built to counter Crimson. It's still good in the current format, don't get me wrong, but you don't see this deck nearly as much as Sin, Gogeta, or Gamma, because I do think it can struggle a bit against those red decks, especially going second. But against other mid-range decks, against other control decks, Trunkshita is very, very good. Trunks Future on the Line is somewhat of an obnoxious card, kind of gatekeeping some rogue decks. But so many decks nowadays can either free play something they don't care about resting, or play a barrier card as the first action of their turn, and then kind of just shut this card off altogether. One thing that I think people are talking about more so for yellow is like hitting yellow generically, because you do have cards like Robotic Riposte that are kind of obnoxious as well. For 1 energy, putting a decent stop to your opponent's turn. Again, while this card's very counterplayable, it can be a little bit frustrating, but I think that the problem there would be is if you hit Robotic Riposte, then you're looking at cards like Nimbus and Forbidden Power, which are, you know, Robotic Riposte may be too efficient, but those cards are very inefficient. That might be a little bit too big of a hit to yellow. But on the flip side of that, with, let's just say in a perfect world, Sin, Gogeta, and Gamma do get banned into Oblivion and are no longer competitively playable, then yeah, a deck like Trunkshita might step up big time and just take over the meta in that regard. So that would be a problem. So this might be like a preemptive hit they'd have to do to keep this deck in check. Maybe it's really hard to predict those types of things and whether or not they're needed, but it is something definitely to think about. But yeah, hopefully with other red decks being in the format, we would have a more balanced state of aggro where more red decks can compete and kind of keep these things in check. But anyways, wrapping up the video, we're talking about what is perhaps the biggest offender and definitely needs to be banned, and that is SS4 Goku banning it all. No guys, I'm just trolling. Green is just so bad. But yeah guys, that's all I got for you today. That's what I wanted to talk about, just my opinions, my rationalizations as to why these decks have stayed their time, kind of overstayed their welcome and run their course, and pretty much need to get out of here so we can see some new strategies basically rise up in the format. But anyways, of course guys, I want to know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.